Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on the day after Election Day in the United States. I guess we should rather call it Election Week, because as we have seen, not everything is clear at this point. My name is Berit Enge. I am a former diplomat and journalist, and I have been fortunate to be able to take part in these webinars by way of Benja Fagerland, who is with us on the screen, and her SHEconomy network. This is an initiative where we have met with several women from the political environment in Washington. In the audience today are several people from the various Nordic countries. And we are very happy to have this chance to look into what has happened so far and to hear expectations for what might happen in the future days and weeks. This webinar will be taped and it will be available online after we finish. Let me start by welcoming our three guests today. Three women who are all a part of the Washington political scene. Ann Stone, who is head of the Stone Group, a political marketing firm. She's also the founder of Republicans for Choice. She's the founder of the National Women's History Museum. And she is, I think it's fair to say, a very early supporter of Trump for president. We also have with us Linda Moore, who is CEO of TechNet, the preeminent and bipartisan interest organization for the tech industry. She has also been field director for the Democratic Leadership Council, deputy political director of the Clinton White House, advisor to the Hillary Clinton campaign, and remains, I guess it's fair to say, involved in bipartisan politics these days.
I'm definitely still a Democrat, though.
Sorry?
I'm definitely still a Democrat, though.
Then we have with us Lanae Erickson, who is Senior Vice President for Social Policy and Politics at Third Way, the think tank in Washington that promotes center-left ideas. She comes from Norwegian heritage, I think we need to mention. Her family has actually done a great job of populating America with Norwegian Americans. I heard that your father was the youngest of 13 children. Very happy to have you with us, and thank you to all three of you for taking time out today on such a busy day to be with us. Let's dive right in. We would love to hear from you at this point. I think all of us have followed the events of yesterday on TV. It's been wall-to-wall coverage here in Norway and presumably in all the Nordic countries. But it does still seem unclear what the result is. What does seem clear is that it's a little bit different from what the pollsters told us it would be. So I'd love to hear your take on that as well. But let's start with you, Ann. And what is your view right now?
I think the only thing that we know for sure this morning, that polling as we know it is dead. Virtually every single pollster once again got it wrong. And there are pollsters that claim that some of the pollsters got it wrong on purpose. I don't know if that's the case. I don't assign intent, but they were way, way off. So from that standpoint going forward, I think we may see some pollsters going out of business. Certainly there are a lot of them that deserve to go out of business. Sorry about that. And, you know, that's probably the only surety we have this morning.
Linda, what are your thoughts about where we are?
Yeah, so I went into last night thinking that Joe Biden was going to be president by about 11 o'clock Eastern, or this was going to go on for days or weeks. And it was the latter, and partially because the polling was so off. One thing that I'm surprised by is that Trump really did expand his base. In Texas alone, he got 1 million new voters, and I don't think that people were expecting that. We definitely were seeing a lot of news reports of intense turnout of new voters for Biden. but the expanding of the electorate, for Trump was a little bit different. The one thing I would say that we know this morning too is that Jen O'Malley Dillon, who is the campaign manager for Biden, she did a call with all of her staff, but also a precursor for media several days ago. And Biden's campaign manager did say there's going to be a red mirage early on. It's going to look like Trump won because the votes that are being counted early on are going to look like a Trump win. But we know that this is going to take days after Election Day to tally all the votes. And so what's really outstanding now that we're all watching for are primarily those big urban centers in Georgia and in the blue wall states, the upper Midwest, for those to come in, because that is trending for Biden, and that will really tell the tale.
Lanae, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think I'm a little more certain than either of these two seem to be, looking at the actual numbers and where the votes are left to come in. And I'll save any indictment of pollsters until we get the final tally, because I think even, as you were watching last night, it may say 100% of precincts reporting, but that doesn't count the mail-in vote, the early vote in a lot of places. And so it looked like, oh, we're all in, and we're not yet. So I think we have to wait. We know for certain that Democrats were much more likely to vote early or to vote by mail. And so in a lot of these places, those votes that are coming in and being counted last are either 2/3 or 3/4 for Democrats. In some places in Michigan, they're coming in 90% for Democrats right now. So that just really messes with the math. And I think, let's look at the final tallies to see how off the state polls were, because I don't think they are going to be quite as off as they look right now. So my sense is, given where we have votes left to come in, that Biden is going to be the next president of the United States. I think it's very hard for Trump to get to 270 at this point, because the places that aren't counted yet are those mail-in ballots that are heavily Democratic and those urban centers that are heavily Democratic. So Arizona has already been called by multiple outlets for Biden. If he adds Nevada to that, where Clark County, which is very Democratic, is the only place that hasn't been counted yet, and he's ahead. So I don't see him losing there. Then and then if he adds Michigan and Wisconsin, which I think he will based on those mail-in ballots, we don't even need Pennsylvania. He'll have exactly 270 votes, which is enough to make him the president. So I think Pennsylvania is going to take another week to count, but it might not matter at this point. But I will say, Democrats had bigger hopes than that. And we were hoping for the Senate, which we're not going to get. So we are going to look at more divided power in Washington. I can't imagine why Americans think that the gridlock that we've seen is what they want to continue when we can't even get a COVID relief package through, but that's going to continue because I don't think there's a path to a Senate majority at this point. The House is going to stay Democratic. The Senate, the upper chamber of our legislature, will be still held by Republicans, and then there will be a Democrat in the White House. So a lot more, kind of bipartisan work than I think folks were hoping, who thought maybe Democrats would sweep all of those things.
Well, as you were saying, there's a lot that we don't know, but one thing that we do know that is quite encouraging, I think, and quite amazing in a year like the one that we're in, is that the turnout was so great. And from what I'm reading and seeing, it's the highest turnout in ages. The other thing is that everyone, at least told me and have told me over the years, that increased turnout will always benefit the Democrats. So Anne, can you explain a little bit of the importance of this, the turnout itself, and what you read into this?
Well, when the final votes again are tallied, I think you're going to find out a lot of the new voter turnout actually did go for Trump. I don't know if he got the majority, but that's not to be written off. The massive rallies that he had all over the country, we did something called geofencing, where, for example, when he had 100,000 people show up in North Carolina, we were able to geofence, and we knew how many Republicans were there, how many Democrats, how many new voters, etc. The same thing when we had 57,000 show up at one of the rallies in Pennsylvania, just tens of thousands of people all over. from the geofencing that we've done at the rallies, we know a large portion of those going to the rallies were people who had never voted before. So again, let's wait and see what happens in the end when the votes are tallied as to whether or not it's so overwhelmingly for Biden. But you have to understand, if I were the average American voter, I don't know if I would have voted for Trump because of what I saw in the regular media. There was an incredible and concerted effort to run against Trump for several years now, where they literally, covered things that he did well, emphasized things, no matter how small, that he did badly, very overwhelmingly. And there really became even more divided in the United States between those who knew one set of facts and the others who knew another set of facts. And generally the difference was what people didn't know because our media just flat out didn't cover it.
And I'll just add, I think there was a bit of an asymmetry here this time because Democrats were not doing voter registration drives or events in person in the same way that Republicans were. So, so we were doing texting and phone banks and all those kinds of things, but we weren't going door to door. We weren't doing, in-person get out the vote, in-person voter registration because we were trying to make sure we didn't get folks sick. And so there were two different methods being used. And I think that'll be interesting to look at the data to see, can you do all of your get out the vote and voter registration without personal contact? And maybe the answer is maybe not.
Yeah, we did 150 million household contacts, much of it before COVID. So it had nothing to do with keeping people safe or whatever. And certainly when they were doing it during COVID, it was generally in states where it was a low risk and all that. But that, you're right. The retail politics of the two parties was very different this year, and it will be interesting to see how much that impacts things.
One thing that people should just keep in mind is that, we went through Bush versus Gore back in 2000. That took until December 12th. Now, I remember that vividly. A lot of people in America don't. Yeah, that's a long time. That's like 5.5 weeks. So, I've been, prepared for this to go on for several weeks. Both sides are lawyered up. The Democrats have definitely planned on every scenario. The battle between the Republican Party lawyers and the Democratic Party lawyers have been going on intensely for the last few weeks, and Democrats have won the majority of the cases that have upheld all the state rules of how you have to count the ballots, count every ballot up until this date, all of that sort of thing. So, there is some worry about the undermining of democratic institutions in America, which has been touched upon. The undermining of trust in journalism, of mainstream media is a real concern. And I would imagine that our people looking on from other countries should be alarmed by that. I certainly am alarmed by it. And then the worry about the Supreme Court, being 6-3 conservative versus, non-conservative, and how that could end up, because Trump did say at a rally a few days ago, I should win on election night, but if I don't, a few days after that in the Supreme Court. Well, my personal opinion is, I'm sure the justices were like, really? Did you say that out loud? Did you need to say that out loud? Because, the last thing they need is to be, responsible for yet another hallmark of democracy being viewed as a political institution. So those are just a few things that, I would imagine folks looking at America from abroad are a little worried about.
Well, actually, dovetailing on that, and again on the media, oftentimes I would get articles from England and from Canada that had more balance and had more insight than from our own press. And in fact, articles that would say, why can't Americans see that they're not hearing about this, that, and the other, and that they were astounded at the stuff that wasn't being covered. For example, Trump, the great warmonger, who now has, what is it, 5? Are we up to 5 Nobel Peace Prize nominations from all over the world, one of which being Norway? And I know the guy in Norway is not somebody you're really fond of, but also from Sweden, from Finland, from Australia, and I think there's one other one coming, for his initiatives in the Middle East, and also Serbia, Kosovo. The one from Australia is for his new approach to peacemaking, which is again opened up peace talks all over the world in places, between the Taliban and the Afghanis and the Kurds and the Turks. And there's all kinds of stuff like that going on. And this is very against type. And our media, the main part of our media, never reported it. The average American has no idea. The average American female has no idea that Trump has followed through with no new wars, bringing troops home and promoting peace. And that's really against type. And that was totally covered up.
I think a
Well,
part of what you have to
sorry.
worry about along those lines, though, is that there are other people who view it as America not leading the world as a superpower the way it always did, and a tend towards isolationism. So that's just the other side of what Anne just said.
Right. And America isn't leading the world the way it used to be, and it's actually to the benefit of most of the world. I know some of the EU folks don't think so because of his stand with EU, but the way he has changed the dynamics, both in Asia and what's going on there, but in the Middle East specifically, is just incredible. And again, I've heard more about it in the foreign press than I have in American.
It is quite amazing when you do read about the various political events in the two parts of the American press. I have to agree with you on that, and it's sometimes it is completely different worlds. But let me ask you this: as you alluded to, Trump is not hugely popular in Norway. There are some friends of Trump here as well, but not
He
that
loves
many.
Norway. You're his favorite country.
But tell us what it is that Norwegians and a lot of Europeans don't get about Trump. Why he's so popular
with Americans. Why
with
so
Americans?
popular with
Yes.
Americans, with a certain group of Americans. Probably singularly, it's because they feel that he, to the extent that he could, has kept the promises that he made. You know, the New York Times and the Post are fond of saying, "Oh, Trump always lies. He lies about everything." Blah blah blah. You know, he's a New York guy from Queens. He's a salesman. He exaggerates. I'm not going to say he always tells the truth. Of course, we certainly know that Joe Biden doesn't. But the point is, the one thing they say, he's never lied to us about what he's going to do. And if he said he's going to do X, Y, and Z, he does. And our press always seemed shocked when he would do something and we'd say, wait, look at the election, look at the primaries. That's what he said he was going to do. So a good body of Americans say, you know, this is the first elected official we've had that's actually followed through on the stuff to the extent that he could, because he was blocked by Congress for some of the stuff, and you know, by being tied up with a lot of distractions like the so-called Russia hoax and other stuff that went on, and that lovely impeachment that was really legitimate. So being tied up like that kept him from accomplishing some things, and frankly kept the country's focus off of things like the diseases coming in from China. But anyway, past that, they look at him and say, yeah, you know, at least we know he's trying. And they also see, most people do know that he doesn't take a paycheck, that he donates his salary back. What they don't even know is his family doesn't take a paycheck. Ivanka, who's working in the White House, and Jared, neither one of them take a dime, which is in stark contrast to the Biden family.
I'll just jump in here to say, you know, I think what Anne has described is maybe what the Trump base likes about him. I don't think that it's what the swing voters like about him. You know, and we do a lot of public opinion research in the suburbs, in these places that are really deciding this election. And what we heard folks say who were still struggling with which candidate they were going to vote for was they thought Trump delivered on the economy. It was all about the economy. It wasn't about
That's one of his
anything else.
promises.
Yeah, well, they didn't phrase it that way. They said he is a good steward of the economy. He's a businessman. They actually don't like a lot of other things about him, but that's important to them. And so that was his thing to really lean into the whole time. And I think then when you overlay, though, this pandemic on top of it, all of a sudden it became much more difficult for him to make that argument, because folks in these suburbs started saying, well, you can't actually get the economy back on track unless you get the pandemic under control. And I do not trust Trump to do that. And so they started really turning on him, and his approval ratings on handling of COVID have been in the toilet the entire time. And so I think that was really the tension. And had we not had a global pandemic, I think that Trump would easily have won re-election, because he did, in fact, have an advantage on the economy, which is really important to suburban voters. But here we are with hundreds of thousands of Americans dead, and people thinking that his erratic and chaotic behavior is not what we need in order to get that pandemic under control.
It's going to be very interesting, because last night Jake Tapper was in a bit of a panic because exit polling for the day of voting was seeing a lot of voters say they actually, liked his approach to COVID, or it didn't bother them, and it was not at all what they were expecting in terms of reaction. But again, there it goes to how the press has covered what his reaction is. Because if you look at the way that Biden and Obama handled H1N1 and other diseases that came up under them, the media very easily could have whipped them into a frenzy back then as to the horrible handling. As Ron Klain, who's Biden's chief of staff, said, they did everything wrong. And it's only because the disease wasn't as lethal as COVID that we didn't have, whole-scale deaths. I mean, they totally blew it. In that case, there were over 70 million Americans affected by the disease. This, we're at just under 9 million with COVID. So our media did a great deal to push the Democrats' narrative on this, to create a drumbeat of this was so horrible, and kept comparing us to the world. Whereas if you took all of EU and how they handled it versus all of America, because we are United States and our states are very different in terms of the way they handled. So you couldn't just compare us to one country, but if you took a group of similar countries, put it together and put the results face to face on that, we actually were very comparable or a little bit better to where a more larger collective had handled it. And again, in the end, are we going to look back and say that Sweden handled it the best way? I don't know. We'll see when all is said and done. But again, the media helped create the narrative that everything was a disaster in the way that they talked about it. Whereas when Obama-Biden blew the last major health crisis, they basically covered it up.
Lanae has a good point about this, because that the division between voters who were voting on the economy and voters who were voting on coronavirus, that's a very real divide.
That's true.
And
that is true.
And it was the as you watch the polling all throughout the race, it was the increase in cases of COVID and deaths of COVID that have started to rise a lot in the US, and will probably continue to, that in some ways, sad to say, was fueling a more vote for Biden. But the fact that Biden never got, got beyond Trump on the economy was always a concern. This is a dividing line, I think, between Biden and Trump voters too. And this goes back to how Trump ran as a candidate, back in his first race. His voters are very much, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Anne, if I'm being too general, but all the Trump voters who are friends and family members of mine, they really do like this person who is sort of shaking up the system, telling them, this isn't how it's going to be done. I'm doing it different. No one's going to tell you how to live your life. Whereas the Democrats are more of like, I want, sort of American government to be the way it always has been. We're a collective group. We're all in this together. And they have very different views about how even coronavirus should be dealt with.
You're absolutely correct. And one other piece of exit polling that's going to be very interesting, and I don't know if any of you, Lanae or Linda, if you've seen this, one of the indications we were getting is the youth vote was starting to move in our favor too, because they didn't like Biden's approach going forward with the threat of lockdowns and all that. Young people, they want to get out. They know they don't get sick as easily as older do. They want to get out. They want jobs. They want an open economy. So it's going to be very interesting again in the end, where that vote ends up, and if enough of them did come over to make the difference in the final days.
And then, of course, we did have a huge advantage for Joe Biden among women.
Mm-hmm.
Women,
oh, absolutely.
More holistic. We're in this together. Let's all, get this virus under control. Let's take care of our elderly, our young, everyone. I mean, just
right.
A very different attitude from women to men.
Well, and again, you can thank our media, because any negatives of him with women, and there were a lot that could have been brought out, certainly an array of scandals. There are about 10 women whose stories got suppressed, and other stuff going on, especially with Hunter and Joe's involvement in Hunter's deals and lying to the American people about what he'd done and what his relationship is with China. Again, when all this stuff comes out, and I'll tell you, if Biden does win by some chance, that's not going away. And boy, he's going to regret that we have a Republican Senate, because the Senate is the one that's going to go after him. They're still investigating it along with the FBI. I mean, the fact that there's an open FBI investigation on both Hunter and Joe for money laundering, in Hunter's case, child pornography, and selling political favors. That's going to be very interesting. It's going to make anything they threw at Trump look tame, except our stuff actually will have some basis in fact.
I think we're in for interesting times either way. But let me ask you this: we do not know who's going to come out in the end winning the presidential election, but we do know sort of what the House is going to be looking like, and we don't know about the Senate, but it may remain in Republican control. So if Biden does win, what would it look like for him to govern?
I'll go ahead and take it first. Yeah, I mean, the Democrats and the Biden team, obviously was really hoping for, and it's expected that, if Biden wins the presidency, he would take the Senate too. There's still some races outstanding, so we don't know how it's all going to turn out, Georgia, but also a few others. I really was hoping for, consolidated power of one party, honestly, because it's the only time things really get done. I will say that on the Republican side and on the Democratic side, so when Republicans, had the levers of power of all, we got tax reform done and some other things that had been languishing for a long time. In America, I just really think that people are yearning for things to get done and for the gridlock to stop. And I was really hoping for a reset of all that, and I still am. But with if there is a Biden as president and a Republican Senate, that's going to be very difficult because they'll feel emboldened to block. They do have a very tough map next time too. Republicans are going to be defending a lot of seats in 2022 as well. But the fact that, so far we haven't seen the kind of pickup on the Democratic side in the House and Senate is very concerning.
Yeah, the Democrats will be defending Moore, I believe. And as well, I think overall you have to look at, what is he going to be able to get done? Well, let's look at what he's not going to be able to get done, which at least warms my heart that there won't be an end to the filibuster in the Senate. I don't think, although the Republicans could decide to take Chuck Schumer's advice and do away with it. And there also won't be court packing, and there also won't be a move to abolish the Electoral College. So from that standpoint, America will be better off.
Those aren't things that I think would have happened anyway. But Lanae, you work with Congress all the time. What
I agree. I spent my entire weekend talking to reporters about how powerful the left wing of the Democratic Party was going to be in a new Biden administration, because I represent a more kind of center left wing of the Democratic Party. And I think the answer now is not very powerful at all. And to Linda's point, I think that there would have been a lot of limits on that power anyways, because the Democrats who delivered the majority in the House and the ones that are deciding the majority in the Senate come from red and purple places. And so they were already not interested in coming in and blowing up the system, doing court packing, Green New Deal, Medicare for all. They ran on democracy reform and getting COVID under control. But I think it's going to be really, really hard to get anything done with a Republican Senate because Mitch McConnell has decided that it's better for him if he just says no to everything. And that was his stance in the Obama administration, and it will be again. The counterweight is that we have serious crises we're dealing with in this country right now, the pandemic and the economic decline that has gone with it. And so there is going to be a lot of pressure from constituents in every state to do something on COVID relief. And I think that will be easier to get done when Republicans in the Senate are the ones negotiating it, as opposed to this White House, because this White House hasn't even been aligned with folks in its own party about what they're trying to get done. And so Democrats have been negotiating with like 5 different people and don't even know what the Republicans want. Now there will be one locus of power, Mitch McConnell, and he'll decide to wield it how he wants. But I think that will be a more a more predictable negotiating partner than this White House has been around basic COVID relief.
Well, again, I think you need to tell AOC and the squad that they no longer have any power, and you need to tell the US media, because I think as long as the media is willing to give them air, which they do, and give them a platform, which they do, you're going to spend, should Biden end up becoming president, you're going to spend the next 2 years till the midterms getting savage from that side, because they're not going to shut up. So it's going to be very interesting. You're going to see a very different divide accentuated if that's the case going forward.
Let me take just a moment to ask our audience to send in questions if they have them. Our chat is open, and please, we will welcome your questions for the panelists. Linda, I wanted to ask you about more specifically about the Democratic Party. You worked for a long time in the Clinton White House. You've also been advising Hillary Clinton on her campaign. You have followed this very closely for many, many years. How do you see the Democratic Party going from here? And are there lessons from the past that you would like to see the party pick up on again?
Yes, and I want to just point out that, well, I worked for a moderate for 10 years in the Senate too, and my whole career has been around the centrist, element in Democratic politics, and I know Lanae is focused on that too, and Anne, interestingly, has a wide range of perspectives over the course of your career on this and the impact you've had, for your party and for Democrats. I think that there are lessons to be learned for both parties. I'll let Anne address those, but I'll tease just a few. After Romney won, I'll get to the Democrats here in 1 second, but after Romney lost, there was a big call for soul searching within the Republican Party to reach out to other, people of color, other points of view, because they knew that the demographics changing in the country was not going to portend well for the Republican majority. That's still true. I think that, again, I was surprised at the new voters for Trump, but the changing demographics of the country are still a Mack truck headed towards the Republican Party. And if they don't change, they're in for minority status. The Democrats have a lot to learn too, but I really was heartened that Biden, the moderate in the race, not Bernie Sanders, not Elizabeth Warren, other people who were more to the left, won the nomination. There was a reason for that. That's what the Democratic Party wanted. And I do believe that, Joe Biden still will be the president, and he will govern in that kind of vein as a moderate. I think it would be more akin to how Bill Clinton governed. And I would say that, some people still complain that Barack Obama was too close to Wall Street or too close to business and was too moderate, so I really understand Anne's point of view about the squad and all that stuff. But, Joe Biden has made it really clear at several different times here over the course of the last year that, he is a moderate, and I really think he's going to govern as a moderate. In terms of lessons that we have to learn, I think that we have underestimated the appeal of Donald Trump and his message and the absolute divide in the country. When you look at how close his presidential race was and how stark the differences were, there were a lot of people who looked at Donald Trump and said, I want more of that. There's an identity crisis in America. And the difficult part for me, as I look at it, is it's not really state by state, it's really urban versus rural divide. And the Democrats have gotten as far as they have in this election because the suburbs really joined in with the urban areas in a way that they didn't. Suburbs went more for Trump last time than they did this time. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned about demographics. One trend that we definitely all should watch is that you saw how close Texas is. So, that's just an example of one state, but a really big, important one where you've got this diaspora of people moving from really expensive places like Silicon Valley, San Francisco, other parts of California, New York, all that, to places that are redder states. And so, you saw Texas pretty close this time. I think in 2022, it goes blue. In 2024, it's definitely blue. And you're going to see that in some other states too. It's why Arizona is also, going to go for Biden. The map is changing. There were lessons from Florida in that, the Miami-Dade County and the Hispanic, Latino, Cuban vote very much fell apart for Biden, but you saw it hold really well in all the other states. So it's there's still a lot to sort through, but those are my fast takes.
Yeah, let me add two things to that. I think, on the suburbs point, Linda said this is going to be more like Bill Clinton. I think in some ways that's true, but I also think the Democratic moderate looks different than it did in the 1990s. So I'll give you an example. I'm from northern Minnesota. My hometown congressman has always been a Democrat. He was the last remaining kind of rural Democrat in the Midwest, and he lost last night. He's
Colin Peterson.
Colin Peterson. He's gone now. So, he was the kind of moderate we had before. We had folks that represented big swaths of the Midwest. Well, now we have folks that, if you look at the map, represent a much smaller area because they're in these tiny concentrated suburbs that are much more densely populated. So the map of the Midwest in particular has gone from blue in lots of places and then blue in the city with red suburbs to completely inverse. And that is a different kind of moderate. So if you're a moderate from the suburbs, you don't want to raise taxes, but you're okay with gun regulation. You're okay with LGBT people. You're okay with probably pro-choice. Whereas Colin Peterson was much more concerned about social issues, but was very, very pro-labor on the economic issues. So I think today's moderates are very cautious and pro-business, cautious of taxation and spending, and very open on things like racial justice, on things like gun safety. And that is going to make the Democratic Party look different going forward.
Well, I was interested to hear what you all are saying. I don't disagree with a lot of what you said, but let's look at this. When you say it's rural versus urban, that's true. It's been that way for a while. And what the party started to do, but didn't sort of complete the job, was to say, look at the urban policies. In the top 20 cities, they're run by Democrats, and they're a mess. And the Democrat policies in the urban areas have failed. I mean, our largest cities are absolutely imploding, and they're horrible. They're a mess in crime, the economics, everything was terrible. So in fact, we were able to make some appeal, especially with the riots. Those were not our people in the streets, to make inroads in areas that were very surprising, like Kenosha, Wisconsin. Last time Trump carried it by a couple hundred votes. Last time I looked, he was ahead by over 12,000 votes. And that's because of the riots in that area. So we'll see how this all sort of pans out in the end. But the other sort of sadly amusing thing is, you're right, there's been a lot of flight from Democrat-controlled urban areas to more red states because they're better run. And in Texas, they actually had signs at the border saying, if you're coming from California, leave your politics behind, because they understood that that's what they exactly were doing. They were fleeing to a state that was better run, but now they're going to come in and mess them up with the same kind of politics that they allowed to go on where they came from. So I think you're going to see a lot of sorting out going on. But if there's one thing we know from the past 4 years, there's been a real indictment of Democrat policies in our urban areas because they are a failure. Absolute abject failure. And the party started to communicate that, didn't do effective enough job communicating that. Of the top 20 cities, only 2 that are having problems are run by Republicans. And they're at the bottom of the list. They've got the least trouble.
So do you guys see any sign that we may be moving towards what I think most people want at the end of the day, which is more reconciliation and more being able to work together? I was a bit afraid of hearing some of the prognosis before the election day that we might see fighting at the polls. We might see people trying to scare people off at the polls. I have not seen that there's been stories on that, which I thought was at least one small encouraging sign. But to all of you, do you see any sign that we may, when this is over, be able to head towards the time where there may be a little more cooperation?
I have to tell you, I am not hopeful, and our people are really, really angry. And this is even, when Trump is declared winner, they're still angry, and they're angry at the U.S. media. They feel that the journalism is dead by and large. They have just failed totally. So that's one of the things that has to be solved. But there's a real deep anger, deep resentment, and they feel that Biden's going to impose restrictions and interfere with their lives to an extent that's not acceptable to them. So no, this is not going to go away. Whether or not it's manifested, right away, that's another question. But trust me, they're going to figure out a way to strike back, whether they wait till the midterms or before then. But the anger is not going to go away, because they really do feel, and they have evidence, they've been screwed over. And they feel this president was totally screwed over by the media and by the establishment. They hired him to be the disruptor. And the one thing that Trump did was he was able to demonstrate that they were right, that there is this establishment that will not tolerate people doing things a new way. And that's what we want him to do. He started to shake things up, and he did expose a lot of that's in there. So within our party, I know the people that are called affectionately never Trumpers, that they will never be welcome back. Our party will find a way to do without them by reaching out more to the Hispanic and Black community. And again, in the end, I think you're going to see Trump's support has gone up dramatically with both communities. We know, as Linda said, in Florida, that was a big part of the edge that gave him Florida. So we'll see going forward, but I'm not hopeful at all.
Well, let me be the optimist here. I think, there's a couple things going for us. Number one is, as you said, we were all concerned, and I had in the back of our minds, is there going to be violence in the street? Are we going to actually see the votes counted? And what we're seeing is the votes are being counted. We're going to find out what the outcome is, and then we're going to deal with it. And it might not be what anyone was hoping for exactly, but we have a democracy. It's going to happen, and Donald Trump is going to leave the White House. So I think, that's a good thing to start with. And then the second is
counting the eggs before they're hatched.
Well, my viewpoint is that the Republican Senate and every Republican who's actually in office, except for Trump, has been responsible and said we need to count the votes, and that is what's happening. But the other thing is, and this is true of all the public opinion research I do too, people believe that Trump is making the division in this country worse on purpose, because he believes that it benefits him and his election. And so to have a president in the White House who is concentrating on bringing the temperature down rather than ramping it up will be a change for all of us, and for most Americans who don't want to have to think about, what is my president tweeting today? Did he blow something up overnight? It will be a return to normalcy, because if you've looked at Joe Biden's Twitter feed, it's very boring, and that is what we're all hoping for going forward.
Lanae, I'm sorry, I have to disagree, because this is this is the media spin. That's exactly what the media says. And our folks look at it and go, really? He's the one dividing? It's the media and the Democrats that keep hyping any little thing he says and trying to make it into something divisive, claiming he's racist. How many times has the guy had to denounce racism, in the last 4 years, let alone the last 10, thousands of times. And they keep bringing it up anyway because they want to divide, and they use the identity politics to do so. And our folks look at that and say, this is ridiculous. They're the ones that are promoting hate, not us. And reporters who've gone to MAGA rallies come away totally confused. And some of them are saying, these people aren't at all what the media has been telling us they are. These people are full of love. They love the country, all of this. They aren't the haters. They aren't the ones. And then you go to a protest and all you get is the hate from the other side. So we're not the haters. That is a media narrative. We are not the haters at all, but we're ticked, and we're not pushovers, and we're not patsies. So we will find a way, should the election results in the end not favor Trump, we'll find a way to pay back.
Again, I think Anne's describing a very small slice of the electorate, and she's right about that slice, but the swing voters I poll are looking for normalcy, and I think that's what they'll get.
Yeah.
And polling has been so accurate.
Because I haven't spoken yet. So I would
Linda's
just
turn.
say, yeah, so and those of you who are watching, you're seeing the divide in America play out right here on your screen, unfortunately. So I like a lot of people, I think, I don't look at the characterizations of Trump. I look at Trump's own words and Trump's own tweets. Because I feel like it's important to take someone at face value and not look at the filter through which they're coming at you. And you know, my impression and my understanding of all the polling, all the people who switched from Trump to Biden in this election, a lot of it was about behavior. It was just as much about behavior, if not more, than it was about policies. And that's also why you have the gender divide. So this, I agree with everything Lanae said about this sense of normalcy, this distaste for the tweeting all of the time, and the distaste for tweeting white supremacist kind of messages and QAnon kind of conspiracy theory messages. You know, he's called to account in one town hall recently about, why are you retweeting these things? He's like, well, I'm just retweeting. You're like, well, you're not someone's crazy uncle up in the attic. Like, you could just retweet whatever you want. You know, his kind of rhetoric and the things he puts out there into the system does give these people this impression that he does support white supremacists and that he does support QAnon. That's just the perspective that people who watch what he does have. And so, you know, I think a lot of people in America are the same way Lanae just described it. You know, when Joe Biden's president, and I think he will, you know, prevail in the end, we'll see. But a lot of people are just looking forward to blissfully ignoring the president for days on end without having to worry about really crazy, you know, divisive stuff coming out of the White House. So,
but Anne, you are our Trump whisperer. Let me ask you a couple of direct questions about him. I think, let me first say, I have many friends in the U.S. who are Republicans, and I have to say that I've heard from a lot of them that they are angry, but at the same time they wouldn't mind if his Twitter feed went off.
But how many of them are actually on the Twitter feed? This is, again, anybody on this seminar can go ahead and sign up. And it amazes me, the man will tweet maybe 100 tweets. The only ones that the press covers are the ones that they can jive up and make look bad. A lot of what he tweets is just good information that doesn't get reported otherwise. So it's been a constructive and informative way of him getting around the press not covering what he's accomplished. So go up to his Twitter feed yourself and look. Does he tweet sometimes badly? Yes. But again, you know, out of 100, there might be 2 that are bad, and those are the ones the press covers. It's all a matter of the press being on a mission to make the guy look bad, and he fully participates in the ability of them being able to make him look bad, because the one great trait of Trump we wish would go away is when he's doing well, he manages to screw it up by stepping on whatever good news there is with a bad tweet or with something else. But from the beginning, they have misportrayed a lot of what he said. And again, those of us on his Twitter feed, and those of us, certainly myself, who've known him for years and worked with him, yeah, but I don't come at it with a bias, you know, really feel that he has been misportrayed for the longest time. And my thing has always been, look at what he's actually done. Stop looking at what he says. But unfortunately, a lot of the women voters can't get past what he says, or aren't being told what he has done. So therefore, you know, I can understand why they would have the attitude about him that they do. But it's going to be interesting to see how things pan out should this election end up in his favor. Because in a second term, where they aren't trying to get rid of him, at least we hope they would let him have a honeymoon this time. You know, I think women are going to be very surprised at the stuff that he's done that they have no idea about.
But Anne, if he were to not win this election, what will he do?
Probably start his own TV network. And I think that's something that he had looked at actually before he ran for office. So I think he'll probably start a TV network to rival Fox, and would blow Fox's doors off. he's not going to go away and he's not going to be quiet. And his greatest revenge will be being able then to get the information out and keep the hot light on Biden and all of Biden's foibles. And that's going to be very interesting going forward.
And last question for the three of you. What do you see in the weeks going forward as the main issues and the main things that we will see happen from a Biden presidency or from a Trump presidency? And in particular, what can we in Europe expect?
Linda, why don't you go first this time?
Okay. Joe Biden has said all along that getting the coronavirus under control is the most important thing because it's a precursor to dealing with the economy. So I think that you would see him really getting into a mask mandate and how to navigate that with the differing points of view of governors across the country is something we'll definitely have to take a look at. Contact tracing, all of those and testing, more testing, all of those kinds of things that he's laid out in his coronavirus plan. Donald Trump has sort of leaned more towards maybe herd immunity is the way to go and has been more hands off. But Joe Biden would lean in heavily on all of the testing, the masking, and the acceleration of the vaccine, which Trump has talked about too. And then he would pivot towards really trying to get a relief package done and support a lot of folks who are very upset that nothing was done by the House or the Senate before they adjourned. So those are the two things that would happen right off the top.
And for
Lanae, let's jump to you. I know you have to go soon.
Yeah, for the world, he's also said that, his first thing is going to be to sit down and call every world leader and say, America is a reliable partner again. For everything Trump has done internationally, I think the fact that he's so unpredictable has been very unsettling for a lot of folks who are used to a more steady hand. And so I think Biden will really want to make sure that, he's re-engaging with the world in a way that folks can expect what they're going to get from him, and that from one day to another he's not zigzagging all over the place and saying he wants a trade deal and then starting a trade war with the same country and vice versa.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see how he deals with China should Biden win this election, but we'll set that aside maybe for a whole other seminar. In terms of Trump, what he would do when he starts his second term, first thing will be the COVID relief package. Even if Biden gets in, that would be his first thing because he does want to see that happen, and they'd be more inclined, I think, to go along with him now. So that would probably be number one. But number two, it's going to be interesting too, since we're on the verge of peace agreements with Saudi Arabia and some of the other final big players in the Middle East, whether or not Trump wants to cement his legacy and go forward there. They may be inclined to do it out of friendship for him, even with him not being president. So either way, we may see additional peace agreements signed, which again will leave a very different legacy than our media has portrayed for Trump. Past that, I think it remains to be seen what else he could get done until this election is settled. But once it is settled, I know he will continue the kinds of policies that enabled us to have the best economy ever in the history of our country. And he'll try to see that go forward, in the coming months. And that's why I really hope the election goes in his favor, because I think Biden will screw it up. And mainly because the people in the Biden administration don't understand the private sector.
Just got a question in from the audience, if I may. And the question is, do women in Washington network across political groups really support each other? Or is the divide also coloring all of the women's networking? Who would like to take that one?
I mean, I'll jump in and say yes. I mean, are there some people that are not happy with me because I supported Trump? Yes, but we find a lot of things that we can work together on. That's one of the reasons I've always, done talks all over the world talking about why you want women more involved in politics, because we do have the ability to set aside differences and work together for the common good. That we are the peacemakers.
And I think
And
when things have gotten done, a lot of times it's been women across the aisle who have come together and formed a rump group and found things in common and decided that they, wanted to make some progress. So I'm hopeful that that'll continue with members of the House and the Senate who are women coming together.
Thank God it looks like Susan Collins got back in, because she and Lisa Murkowski were definitely key to bringing people together on more than one occasion over the past 4 years.
There's a women's Senate caucus, and they've done a lot of good work. And I would say that among operatives, below the elected official level, we always like seeing each other excel, whether it's on the Republican side or the Democratic side.
And they still have dinner, I think, once a month.
Last I heard.
Yeah.
I mean, during COVID, but
Sorry.
yeah.
And I do understand that it looks like this election will bring in quite a few women to the House and the Senate. So on that optimistic note, maybe I will end there. But thank you, the three of you, very, very much for being with us today and sharing your thoughts with us. We will follow this closely as we go forward, but now with a little more knowledge from you all. And let me also say that Benya and I and the SHEconomy Network would like to develop this into a longer term program. So we may be knocking on your door in Washington at some point when the world opens up again. But thanks again for being with us. Really appreciate it. Anne, did you? Oh,
well, I was
okay.
going to say, Lanae and I actually had something else in common. Her father was the youngest of 13, Norwegian. I'm Danish descent, as you know. My father was the youngest of 13 as well.
Linda, any Scandinavians?
3 girls, and I've got no Danish or Nordic roots.
Thank you again.
With you. It's good to see you, Barrett. Thank you.
Very good to see you too. And thanks again to all of you. Thank you to Digital Norway, who has shepherded us through our technical challenges. Thank you to all the audience. Have a good rest of the day. And I hope for all of you who stayed up very late that you get a good night's sleep tonight. Thank you again. Bye-bye.